So, told you yesterday I might not be here today, and I'm not here today. Actually, I am here, like at my house here today, but I'm not here, like where you are today at school. You know what's really fun? Cleaning up barf on a 4-year-old in the middle of the night. Someday, if you choose to procreate, your offspring may do such things, and there's really not a lot you can do except kind of clean it up and do the best you can and go fling the vomit chunks out off the sheet into the front yard. Which is, if you treat it like a sport and try to score yourself on your effort and your success level, then it can be a bit fun. Seeing how far you can fling chunks and try to break your record each time. So with parenting, it's kind of the little things, but if you can turn a lot of these activities into competitions and chart your progress, I made a little Excel spreadsheet of vomit chunks flung and the speed at which the projectile left the sheet. Then you can you turn everything into a competition and also like a science experiment. I may do a science project. Anyway, I'm just talking now. So we're going to talk about The Great Gatsby, Chapter 8 today. So if you could open up your books, and take your packet out, that would be good. So obviously, Chapter 8 is after everything went down yesterday. We had the big car accident, and we ended, last time we saw Gatsby, he was hiding in the bushes in Daisy's yard just to make sure that nothing happened, right? I think the thing Gatsby was worried about is that he didn't know necessarily whether Tom knew necessarily who was driving, right? Because if Tom knew who was driving, if Tom knew his wife was driving, then all of a sudden things start to look a little suspicious because Tom doesn't necessarily know if Daisy knows that Tom was having the affair with Myrtle. And so if she does know that information, then that accident looks a lot more suspicious, right? Like Tom killed her affair, and so Daisy killed Tom's affair, literally. So the next morning, Gatsby had been waiting out all night, which is pretty depressing, right? If you think about at the end of Chapter 1, the first time we saw Gatsby, and he was standing out late at night looking over Daisy's house, with all the dreams and possibilities of being with her, and now he's standing out, looking over the house, and there's nothing, right? The dream is gone. So if you could open up to page 148 in your book, please. A couple things I want to talk about. In this chapter, we get kind of the full backstory of why Gatsby fell in love with Daisy in the first place, right? And this will be useful information for your paper, especially for the American Dream section, because we're going to use this as kind of the basis of our argument of how he got started. So on page 148, all this stuff, Gatsby's telling Nick all of these things after the car accident and after everything's happened, right? A lot of the information that we've got over chapters 5, 6, 7 was actually told to Nick by Gatsby at this point in the story, right? After basically the dream's dead and everything bad's happened. It says in 148, Daisy was the first nice girl he'd ever known. And I don't quite understand that, nice, because she doesn't seem to be nice at all. She seems to really kind of be a jerk, but regardless. In various unrevealed capacities, he had come in contact with such people, but always with indiscernible barbed wire between. He found her excitingly desirable. He went to her house at first with other officers from Camp Taylor, and then alone. It amazed him. He'd never seen such a beautiful house before. But what gave it the air of breathless intensity was that Daisy lived there. It was as a casual thing for her as the tent out in the camp was for him. And this is, I think he does love Daisy. Daisy's pretty and very wealthy, but Daisy represents a lifestyle that he wants, right? For him, he's used to sleeping in a tent for the military. He's used to growing up on the farm and having to do chores and doing all that work. For her, the only thing she's ever known is living in a house like this, right? And when Gatsby walks in there the first time, he doesn't know her. He doesn't know anything about her. She doesn't know him. And he's just amazed that this is just life, right? For her, this is just reality and the way things are. And that's what he wants, right? He doesn't want this to be a special occasion that he gets to go see this nice house. He wants that house to be his, and he wants to just have that be casual, everyday life. Going on, so when he first met Daisy, it says in 149, he might have despised himself, for he had certainly taken under her false pretenses. I don't mean that he had traded on phantom millions, but he had deliberately given Daisy a sense of security. He let her believe that he was a person much from the same stratum as herself, that he was fully able to take care of her. So he didn't lie to her and say that he had a ton of money, but he did give her the impression, right, that he was kind of in the same social area that she was, like as wealthy as she was. And since he only had to wear his military uniform, it was easier to do that, right? Like if he dressing in the military uniform, he just goes as a soldier, right, or someone in the military. But if he had to wear his regular clothes, that illusion would probably be harder to pull off. going on. On the next page, on page 150. So why don't you take your packet out, and after I read this quote to you, maybe we could have the sub pause the video for a minute so you can write this down. If you look on page 150 at the top, that first, oh, that's not useful. First full paragraph where it says American Dream, it says, Gatsby was overwhelmingly aware of the youth and mystery that wealth imprisons and preserves, of the freshness of many clothes, and of Daisy gleaming like silver, safe and proud above the hot struggles of the poor. So what he sees with that is that, remember the kid who ran over the people, right, and got off? The silver like safe and proud above the hot struggles of the poor. With all that money, that made life a lot easier in a lot of ways. And so this is kind of linking Daisy to the American dream and Daisy to that goal of where he wants to get to. Right? And so we can use this as evidence of why he fell for her in the first place. Going down the page a little bit on 150, I'll actually let the substitute pause for a moment so you can copy that down. And we're back. Now at the bottom 150, I'm just going to read this to you because I like this part. Those of you who are seniors, and those of you who will be seniors next year, will likely have some experiences similar to this. Summer after you graduate is a weird summer, right? Because it's very exciting and fun, lots of hanging out with friends, but it's not too long into the summer before people you've known for a long time and been friends with for a long time start to leave. And from kind of mid-July on, lots of students are going to college, lots of students are going to the military, lots of students are getting jobs, and you just kind of have goodbye after goodbye after goodbye. I'm not trying to be depressing here, but that's kind of the way it goes. And so this is that same moment for Daisy and Gatsby. And if you are dating someone, you will have a weird goodbye too, and it may be something similar to this. I'm just going to read it because I like it. On the last afternoon before he went abroad, he sat with Daisy in his arms for a long, silent time. It was a cold fall day, with a fire in the room and her cheeks flushed. Now and then she moved, and he changed his arm a little, and once he kissed her dark, shining hair. The afternoon had made them tranquil for a while, as if to give them a deep memory for the long parting the next day promised. They had never been closer in their month of love, nor communicated more profoundly one with another than when she brushed silent lips against his coat shoulder, or when he touched the end of her fingers gently as though she were asleep. If I could write a sentence like that in my life at some point, I would die a happy human. He is so good, and I know that some of us don't dig it and they don't appreciate it, and I get that for sure. But if you try to dig it, right? Because he knows what he's doing. Okay, now on 151, one other part I just like, I'm going to read to you. Especially as we kind of get near the end of the book, Fitzgerald starts to show off a little bit more. As the plot's kind of winding down a little bit, he gets to throw in some more fancy writing. For Daisy was young, and her artificial world was redolent of orchestras and pleasant, cheerful snobbery, and orchestras which set the rhythm of the new year, summing up all the sadness and suggestiveness of life in new tunes. All night the saxophones wailed the hopeless comment of the Beale Street blues, while the 100 pairs of gold and silver slippers shuffled in the shining dust. At the great tea hour there were always rooms that throbbed incessantly with a low, sweet fever, while fresh faces drifted here and there like rose petals blown by the sad horns around the floor. As I said when we started, this book has more sentences and more paragraphs that just make me put the book down and say words I probably shouldn't say, to show how impressed I am with them. And I'm not going to say the words I probably shouldn't say on this video, because then the words I shouldn't say me saying are on the video, and then you point to show it to your parents and I get yelled at. So I'm not going to say it, but you can imagine that I would be putting the book down right now and saying some naughty words. Anyway, moving forward. Go to page 153, and if you are writing about past versus future, this is a good quote. So after I show you this, I'll have the substitute kindly push pause on the video, so those of you who are writing with that theme can write it down. And it is right in the kind of near the bottom of the page. All right, on page 153, and it said, "I'm going to drain the pool today, Mr. Gatsby. Leaves will start falling pretty soon, and then there's always trouble with the pipes." "Don't do it today," Gatsby answered. He turned to me apologetically. "You know, old sport, I've never used that pool all summer." Now, we've seen this a couple times, and 3 or 4 chapters ago, Gatsby said to Nick, "Let's go to Coney Island," and Nick said, "It's too late." Gatsby said, "Let's go swimming in the pool." Nick said, "I gotta go to bed." And then we get the scene where Gatsby says, "You can't repeat the past." Why, of course you can. Gatsby believes he can do anything, right? And that time doesn't really matter to him, and he can achieve anything if he wants to badly enough. But we get a number of these little hints that you can't, right? Once the past is past, you can't return to it. You can't do whatever you want, right? And so Gatsby's always focused on this future, right? And in doing so, the future with Daisy, he misses everything that's happened, right? And so for these 5 years, he's been focusing on nothing but her. And as we'll see, that leaves him with nothing, right? He's not making other friendships. He's not doing other things. And so he is, I mean, he's putting all his eggs in one dream basket, if that makes sense. And it's all about Daisy. And if that, now that it hasn't worked, he doesn't have money. There's not much left for him to do. Going on, page 154. The last thing, Nick says two last things to Gatsby. The second to last thing, as he said, as he's leaving, Nick says in 154, "They're a rotten crowd," I shouted across the lawn. "You're worth the whole damn bunch of them put together." He said, "I'm always glad I said that. It was the only compliment I ever gave him, because it disapproved of him from beginning to end." First he nodded politely, and then his face broke into a radiant and understanding smile as if we'd been in ecstatic cahoots on the fact the whole time. Now, what he said, "You're worth the whole damn bunch of them put together," if you look at who the other bunch is, Tom, Daisy, Jordan, all of these are pretty bad people. Jordan, you might make a case that she's okay, but the other Tom and Daisy are really bad people. And at least for Nick, I think the thing that redeems Gatsby in Nick's eyes, even though Nick should disapprove of him, is that, one, Gatsby did it for love, right? I mean, and I think Nick really respects that. And two, even though he sometimes borders on being a little delusional in terms of being able to repeat the past and things like that, Nick really appreciates the fact that Gatsby can dream and hope and is optimistic and can see the absolute best in every situation and try to make his life into that. And so I think Nick really respects that, and I think there's something really nice about that quality about him. I would put Gatsby as a character up there with almost any character in American literature in terms of summing up Americans. We don't all become criminals and work with Wolfsheim or whatever, but that belief in that dream, that optimism is necessary if you're going to try to go for the American dream and to change your life into something better. Now, a couple other things. Go to page 159, please. So throughout the whole book, we've kind of been wondering about what that big billboard's about, right? With the eyes looking down, Ecclesburg billboard. On page 159, we finally get the answer. So at this point, Wilson is not doing well, right? He's been up for over a day, and yesterday, previously, before the accident, he was really upset and physically ill because he found out his wife was kind of having an affair on him. And then shortly after that, later that night, is when she got hit by the car and killed. And so he's been up since then, all night, and it's starting to be early the next morning, and he, I would say, is fairly deranged. I mean, I would be worried about him. And he's talking to this other guy, Michaelis, and Michaelis, I think he's just some random character to be able to talk to Wilson, but he brings Michaelis over to the window and points out at the billboard and said, "I spoke to her," he muttered after a long silence. "I told her, you might fool me, but you couldn't fool God. I took her to the window, and I said, God knows what you've been doing, everything you've been doing. You might fool me, but you can't fool God." Now, two things about that. One, I don't know if you remember the video we watched, the little clip of the affluenza kid, one who had a really rich family and ended up killing the 4 people. At the very end of that video, and maybe I'll show you tomorrow, it's an interview with a mom, and she says almost the exact same thing. She said something to the effect of, he might think he's gotten away with something, but he hasn't gotten away with anything. He wasn't gotten away with anything from God. God knows exactly what he's done, and he'll have to face the hand of God. I mean, it's not the exact same thing that Wilson said, but it's eerily similar. Right? Now, so he points out the eyes and said, "Those are the eyes of God." Standing behind him, Michaela saw with a shock that he was looking at the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, which had emerged, pale and enormous, from the dissolving night. "God sees everything," repeated Wilson. "That's an advertisement," Michaelis assured him. Something made him turn away from the window and look back into the room, but Wilson stood there a long time, his face close to the window pane, nodding into the twilight. Now, again, you got to take this definition of what the billboard means with a grain of salt, a bit anyway, because Wilson is not doing well mentally. But, I mean, I think it's significant if God is an advertisement, if God's an ad. Because if God's an ad, what is that? That means that Americans are worshiping products, right? We're worshiping advertising, we're worshiping materialism, we're worshiping money. And I think you could make a case that that's a lot of what the book's about. I mean, I think that idea would definitely apply to Gatsby. That's all he's about. Definitely apply to Tom and Daisy, maybe to Jordan. A little bit less so to Nick, but everybody's trying to get there, right? The characters who haven't achieved that money, who haven't gotten the money of Tom and Daisy and Jordan and Gatsby, are still trying, right? Wilson's trying, Nick's trying, Myrtle's trying in her own way. Everyone's trying to get there because that's what everyone's bowing down to. It's a fairly depressing sentiment, but we can talk about how valid that is, but I think it's an interesting idea, and as a symbol, it's a good one. One other thing about this, if you look at the cover of your book, right, usually when a cover for a book is made, it's called the dust jacket, the artist reads the book, and reads the book and finds some theme or idea from the book, and then paints, makes the cover picture for the cover like that, responding to something that's in the book. This painting was painted before before the book was finished, and Gatsby Fitzgerald saw it and he incorporated it into the book. If you look, there's two eyes crying of a woman. There are two naked ladies in the eyes of in the eyes in the picture, and there's a tear coming down. And then there's Coney Island, and so it's kind of just an abstract picture. I would assume that would probably be Daisy crying, but Fitzgerald, the author of the book, liked that image so much that he took the image of the eyes just kind of floating there and turned them into the billboard. Which you turn them as a symbol. I'll be right there with you. Don't. I'll open it for you. You're open. Sorry, we got things going on here. I'm almost done, Allie, and then I will open it for you because you don't want to rip the top. Okay, just don't. Can you stop? This is one of my kids. You say hi.
Hi.
Yep. So we're almost done, guys. Don't. Okay, just go in there. Sorry, we got things going on here. It's hard to be a dad and a teacher at the same time. And for those of you who ask why I don't bring my kids in while I'm teaching, this is the reason. So anyway, now, very end of this chapter, Gatsby, after convincing the gardener to not drain the pool, right, because he hadn't gone swimming all summer, and maybe if he hadn't told the gardener that, then maybe he doesn't get shot because maybe he sees Wilson coming. But it's a little confusing at the end, but on bottom 161 it says, the chauffeur, he was one of Wolfsheim's proteges, heard the shots. Afterwards he could only say he hadn't thought much about them. I drove from the station directly to Gatsby's house, and my rushing anxiously up the front steps was the first thing that alarmed anyone. But they knew then, I firmly believe. Without scarcely a word, I just dropped my book. Please hold. Here we go. Without scarcely a word said, I believe all of us, the chauffeur, butler, gardener, and I, hurried down to the pool. There was a faint, barely perceptible movement of the water as the fresh flow from one end urged its way toward the drain in the other. With little ripples that were hardly the shadows of waves, the laden mattress moved irregularly down the pool. A small gust of wind that scarcely corrugated the surface was enough to disturb its accidental course with its accidental burden. The touch of the cluster of leaves revolved it slowly, tracing like a leg of transit a thin red circle in the water. And so what this is just the image of Gatsby's body floating in the pool, slowly turning around, and the fresh flow would be blood going into the pool. After we started with Gatsby toward the house, that was when the gardener saw Wilson's body a little way off in the grass, and the Holocaust was complete. One of the tricky things about this description is the word Holocaust, right? And the book was written before World War II and before it got now when you say Holocaust, we just think Nazis, right? But at that point, Holocaust would have just meant a lot of death. And so Wilson, I think that we can assume he got the information from Tom, right? In the movie, Wilson says, I have ways of finding out. And so all he knows is either, he's a mechanic, and so he would know other mechanics, and if this fancy yellow car were to come in to get fixed, he could find out that way. Also, the person he knows that has some contact with the yellow car is Tom. And so in the movie, we see him going to Tom's house, and he's got a frightening look on his face, right? And Tom looks legitimately nervous. And so, one, Tom's happy to sell out Gatsby because he hates Gatsby, and whatever Wilson does to him is just fine with Tom. And also, I think he's a little bit genuinely worried that he doesn't want Wilson coming after him. Okay, so